Hello students, welcome back to Let Us Master English. Today we are going to continue with modal verbs. Contents of this video are what are modals, how do we use modal verbs, list of commonly used modal verbs, various uses of modal verbs, characteristics of modal verbs, usage of must, ought to, dare, and need. And after that, there is going to be a homework for you, practice exercise, and you can also find the answers to lecture 2. Now, students, let's get started. First of all, let us see what are modals. Modals, also called modal verbs, modal auxiliary verbs, modal auxiliaries, they all are one and the same thing, are special verbs which behave irregularly in English. Modal verbs are different from normal verbs like read, write, cook, play, run, etc. Modal verbs give additional information about the function of the main verb that follows it. They have a great variety of communicative functions. Students, first let us understand what is the difference between a normal verb and a modal verb. Let us understand this using this example. I speak English. Now, students, which is the verb in this sentence? Speak. Speak is an action word. It is a normal verb. So here I have used simple present tense to convey that I speak English. Now let us introduce modal verb before speak. I can speak English. So here you can see by adding can, what have I done? Here I am telling you my capability, my ability that I am able to speak English. I can speak English. So these modal verbs, they add a new meaning to the sentence. Let us see one more example. You should speak English. Here I have used modal verb should before speak. So what am I doing here? Here I am giving you an advice that you should speak English. So by adding modal verb, we give additional information about the function of the main verb or the principal verb. Modal auxiliaries express the mode or manner of actions denoted by the verbs. For example, she ought to respect her family. He dare not say so. Students, how do we use modal verbs? Let me tell you, modal auxiliaries are used along with main verbs or principal verbs. They are not used alone. Modal verbs are always followed by main verbs. Example, you must submit your proposal by noon on 1st November. So here you is the subject, must is the modal verb which is followed by the main verb that is submit. Let's have a look at one more example. You needn't take off your shoes. So here you is the subject, needn't is the modal verb which is followed by the main verb or principal verb that is take off. Now students, here is a list of modals for you. These are the commonly used modal verbs. For example, can, could, may, might. These 4 modal verbs we have already studied in lecture 1. Shall, should, will, would. This we have studied in lecture 2. And today we are going to study must, ought to, dare, and need. Now, these modal verb can be converted into negative, and when we change a modal verb into negative, it can also be written in the contracted form. For example, can, negative is cannot, and contracted form is can't. Same way, could, negative is could not, and the contracted form is couldn't. May not, and students, we do not use contracted form of may not. Might not, mightn't, shall not, shan't, should not, shouldn't, will not, won't, would not, wouldn't, ought not to, oughtn't, dare not, daren't, need not, needn't. Now, students, let us see uses of modal verbs. Modal verbs are used to express various functions such as number 1, permission. You can give permission or seek permission using modal verbs. For example, may I use your mobile? So here, may is the modal verb which is used for seeking permission. Number 2, ability. I can study the whole night. Obligation. For example, you should keep your promise. Prohibition. You mustn't wear jeans at work. It means it's not allowed. Lack of necessity. For example, you needn't have wasted your time in this useless activity. Advice. You should get up early in the morning. Possibility. It might rain tonight. Promise. I will buy a new dress for you tomorrow. Now, students, let us study some more uses of modals, how to use modal verbs. Number 1, a modal verb does not change according to the number or person of the subject. Now, students, earlier you studied tenses. In tenses, we have seen that when we change the subject, when we change the number from singular to plural, or when the person is changed, first person, second person, third person, the verb changes according to that. But modal verbs do not change according to the number or person of the subject. For example, I can drive, we can drive, you can drive, he can drive, they can drive. So here for singular, plural, first person, second person, third person, there is no change at all. Whereas in tenses, we say I drive, we drive, you drive, he drives, she drives. So they change. Point number 2, only the first form of the verb can be used after a modal auxiliary. Examples, he can write. Now can is the modal verb. After this we have used first form of verb, write. I may play. Now may is a modal. Play is first form of verb. I should try. Should is a modal verb. And try is the main verb. That is first form of verb. It might rain. So students, please keep this point in mind that a modal verb is always followed by first form of verb. But if after the modal you have used have, that time after have we use third form of verb. Point number 3, modals can be used alone in response to a question. Students, earlier I told you that modal verbs cannot be used alone. they are always followed with main verb. But here this is an exception. When you are answering a question, that time modal verb can be used alone. For example, can you drive a car? I can. So here we are giving response to a question. Will you solve this sum? I will. May I take this pen? You can or you may. So in response to a question, it can be used alone. Point number 4, modals when joined with not to form a negative can be contracted. This we have already seen in the table. For example, she cannot swim can also be written as she can't swim. He would not go can also be written as he wouldn't go. Now students, let us see some characteristics of modal verbs. Here are some characteristics of modal verbs. They never change their form. Modal verbs never change their form. You can't add s, ed or ing. For example, she can play the piano beautifully. We cannot write she can play the piano beautifully or she can playing the piano beautifully. This is absolutely wrong. So modal verbs never change their form. Modal verbs are always followed by an infinitive without to. That is bare infinitive. Infinitive means to plus first form of verb. Bare infinitive means first form of verb. Ought is an exception to this rule. Ought does require a to infinitive but otherwise behaves like other modal verbs. For example, they must work on the project. We cannot write they must to work on the project. This is wrong. Modal verbs are used to express certainty, possibility, willingness, obligation, necessity, or ability. Now students, here in this video, we are going to study 4 new modal verbs. First one is must. Must refers to the present or the future tense. Must is used to denote compulsion. So here the action is compulsory. It means if the subject does not do that action, he may have to face some consequence. In should and ought to, we give advice, but with must, it becomes compulsory. For example, a servant must obey his master. It means if the servant doesn't obey his master, then what would happen? He might be expelled from his job, he might be scolded. It means he will have to face some consequence. Next example, I must improve my writing skills. So it is a compulsion. If I don't improve my writing skills, I may lose marks in my exams. Point number 2, to denote certainty or strong belief. For example, all must die sooner or later. Everyone must grow old and perish. Point number 3, to denote determination. For example, I must see you again before I leave for Delhi. I must go now whatever happens. So this is strong determination. Point number 4, to express duty or a very strong obligation. For example, we must practice virtue. It is our duty. We must obey the laws of our country. This is obligation. Point number 5, to denote possibility or inference. For example, they must have reached the station by now. Now students, next modal verb to study is ought, which is always followed with to. Ought refers to present, past or future tense. It is not as forceful as must, but it is stronger than should. It is followed by a to infinitive. Ought to and should have almost the same meaning. They can be used interchangeably. Ought is used to denote the sense of duty or moral obligation. For example, students ought to prepare their lessons well. We ought to love our neighbors. The sense of moral obligation forces from within. There is no outside force or compulsion. Point number 2, to denote strong probability. For example, she ought to pass this time. Now students, next modal verb is dare. Dare means have the courage to do something. And dare can behave either as a modal verb or as a main verb. As a modal verb, dare is used in negative and interrogative sentences. It is followed by a bare infinitive. Bare infinitive means first form of verb without to. For example, I daren't think how many victims there are. How dare she criticize us? Question mark. Dare as a main verb can be followed by a bare infinitive or a to infinitive. When you use dare as a main verb, then you can use either first form of verb or to plus first form of verb. For example, do you dare tell him what happened to his bike? Question mark. Who dares to argue with me? Question mark. He didn't dare to look back. No one would have dared to think about it. But in the expression, don't you dare, it is always followed by a bare infinitive. For example, don't you dare interrupt me. Now students, next modal verb that we are going to study today is need. Need is a semi-modal verb because in some ways it is like a modal verb and in other ways like a main verb. We use need mostly in the negative form to indicate that there is no obligation or necessity to do something. For example, you needn't take off your shoes. He needn't buy a car. Now let's see interrogative form. The question form of the semi-modal need is not very common. It is rather formal. The subject and need change position to form question. For framing question, we don't use do, does or did. Need is shifted to front. For example, need I go there? Need we write this down? Not do we need write this down? Now students, I hope the use of these four modal verbs must, ought to, dare and need is quite clear to you. So now it's homework time. Here is a practice exercise for you. Choose the correct modal option and complete the following sentences. You are given two options and you have to choose the most appropriate one and rewrite the sentence. So I hope you will be able to do it. Now students, here is one more practice exercise for you. Question number 2. Choose the best modal option to complete the following sentences. So here you are given 4 options, out of which you have to choose the most appropriate one. So 5 sentences are here. And you can find next 5 sentences on this slide. Now students, I hope you have done homework of lecture 2. So let us check our answers. Please pick up your notebooks fast. so that we can match our answers. Find the mistakes and correct them. So here, the changes which were required, I have underlined them. So please match your answers and see whether the exercise which you have solved is right or wrong. And these are the answers of next exercise. So students, thank you very much for watching this video. And for more such videos, kindly subscribe my channel and please do not forget to press the bell icon for the latest updates. Very soon, I'll be coming with my next videos on modal verbs. Thank you very much.